By 1862, the United States was a bruised, gilded republic at war. In Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln faced a constitutional crossroads. The Constitution protected slavery where it already existed, and he could not legally free slaves in the loyal border states, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and Delaware, without risking the Union's cohesion. International diplomacy hung in the balance as Britain and France watched for any pretext to recognize the Confederacy. Military events, most notably the Union's stand at Antietam on September 17, 1862, combined with abolitionist pressure from figures like Frederick Douglass, sharpened the moral and strategic case for action. That pressure forced Lincoln to frame emancipation as a wartime measure under his commander-in-chief authority. On September 22, 1862, after the Battle of Antietam, President Abraham Lincoln issued a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation that functioned as a conditional ultimatum. Unless the rebellious states returned to the Union by January 1, 1863, all persons held as slaves in those states would from that time on be free. Lincoln explicitly exempted the loyal border states, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and Delaware, and areas already under Union control, framing the move as a war measure exercised under his commander-in-chief powers. The announcement sent political shockwaves across the country. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass hailed it as a moral step forward, while many Republicans and Democrats worried it might alienate voters. Northern newspapers split in their reactions. The New York Tribune celebrated, while the New York Times urged caution. Maybe clicking subscribe would have calmed the presses. Lincoln's legal advisors, including Attorney General Edward Bates and Secretary of State William H. Seward, endorsed the military necessity rationale, laying the groundwork for enforcement by Union armies and setting the stage for the next phase of the conflict. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation formally took effect, declaring all persons held as slaves in states then in rebellion to be free. But its golden phrasing had limits. It applied only to Confederate-held territory and expressly exempted Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, and any Union-occupied districts. In practice, then, liberty often rode on Union bayonets. Where federal forces advanced at Fort Monroe and Hampton, Virginia, at Port Royal and Hilton Head, South Carolina, and in captured New Orleans, enslaved people fled to Union lines and were declared contraband, a legal status that protected them from being returned. Camps and freedmen's colonies sprang up, and after the Bureau of Colored Troops was authorized on May 22, 1863, thousands enlisted. By war's end, roughly 180,000 black soldiers had served in the Union armies. Internationally, the proclamation recast the conflict as an anti-slavery war, discouraging British and French recognition of the Confederacy and reshaping Northern politics and military aims. On January 1, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, jubilant scenes broke out among newly freed people and abolitionists in Washington, D.C., and in cities from Boston to Philadelphia. At Union lines and in contraband camps around Fort Monroe and Hampton, Virginia, formerly enslaved families sang, opened schools, and sought shelter, while Frederick Douglass and black clergy hailed the order as vindication. Black congregations and abolitionist societies in Washington held fervent prayers and processions filled with hopeful expectation. The Confederacy responded with furious denunciations. Jefferson Davis and Southern newspapers blasted the proclamation as a military usurpation and a provocation. Northern Democrats and Copperheads, led by Clement L. Vallandigham, called it unconstitutional, sparking protests and political resistance that made enforcement difficult. Union commanders in New Orleans and along the Mississippi applied the policy unevenly. Freedom often depended on federal troops, local orders, and chaotic logistics. Thousands would soon enlist in the United States colored troops, yet for many, liberty remained provisional, pushing the nation toward a permanent legal reckoning. The Emancipation Proclamation's provisional freedom, declared effective January 1, 1863, forced a wrenching constitutional reckoning. Lincoln and the radical Republicans moved to turn a wartime proclamation into permanent law. The Senate approved the amendment on April 8, 1864, and after Lincoln's re-election and Union victories, most notably Sherman's capture of Atlanta in September 1864, the House, led by Thaddeus Stevens, passed the joint resolution on January 31, 1865, following fierce lobbying, disputed delegations, and partisan maneuvering. The war ended at Appomattox on April 9, 1865, Congress pushed state ratifications through the year, and the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery was ratified on December 6, 1865. From the turning point of January 1, 1863 to the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865, emancipation transformed the Union's purpose from preserving the nation to advancing liberty. It opened the door to black military service and a clearer path to citizenship, and it legally ended chattel slavery. It also launched Reconstruction's fraught experiments and the long struggle for racial justice, a radiant beginning whose promises remain unfinished and demand a hard, continuing reckoning.